So, do you think we actually need to do this episode or not? I don't understand why we're...
Yeah, I mean, we could put it off for a while if you want.
They say everyone has a book in them. I don't really believe that, do you? It doesn't seem possible. Although I was watching Emergency A&E on Channel 5 the other night, and there was this fella with a bath tap stuck up there. So, I guess it might be true. Welcome to the Failing Writers Podcast.
So, Tom, are you suggesting that we don't really suffer from...
I don't see how it applies to us.
We don't really suffer from procrastination.
I don't get it. No.
Yeah,
Well,
I think...
Of all the people, why would we do this?
Not necessary.
I suppose there might be some listeners that struggle with it.
That's true. So for those people, this is like a little friendly fist bump. Come on, guys.
Yeah, come on. Get your act together, you lot. God. So, we're going to be learning about a lot of stuff that we already know,
Obviously.
John. Old news to us.
Yeah.
Because we just, listeners will know.
We just knuckle down,
get it
don't we, Tommy?
We just very much kind of get in there, get it done, no faff. I've heard that some people will put stuff off.
Yeah. And to be fair, we know that Bairdy does this quite a lot.
Oh, he does, doesn't he? An awful... Thinking about it, yeah, he does. He does,
yeah. He really suffers from this. So in a way, this episode is for Bairdy.
It is. It's a shame he's not here because it really is... It really is all about him, isn't it? About not getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And procrastination.
Yeah.
Who are we talking to, John? You found this guest out for us, didn't you?
Yes, I did. We are talking to Oliver Burkeman, who is a journalist and a writer, but he's someone who's been, in his life, he's been obsessed with productivity and just really fascinated about the subject of procrastination and why we don't just knuckle down and get to work. And he wrote a book that my sister bought me for Christmas called 4,000 Weeks. And I read it and found it extremely interesting and relevant to some of the things that potentially people might suffer from, Tom.
Other weaker people.
Yeah, that's it, those people. And the 4,000 Weeks, I thought was a particularly nice title because it refers to the average lifespan of a human.
Yeah, it's quite scary, that, isn't it? Yeah.
We don't often think of our lifespan in weeks, but when it's said out loud...
It's a very good reframing, isn't it?
It's a little bit terrifying. And I think it puts things in perspective.
There goes a week. There goes another. Soon as I speak, oh bugger. 'Cause the weeks are flying by, sun is whipping through the sky. There it goes another time while we're pretending this is fine. We might all have to decide to reorganize our lives to survive. I'm literally dying to do all the things I want to, while simultaneously knowing it's true that it's very unlikely that I'll see them through. 'Cause the weeks are flying by, won't belong to my demise. Need to organize my life, finish that book I wanna write. What you mean I won't do it? I might. Okay, you're probably right.
Oliver, welcome to the Failing Writers Podcast. I read your book, 4,000 Weeks, recently. I was struck by how much of it seems to apply to writing and procrastination and many of the things that writers struggle with. I wanted to ask you how you actually found the experience of writing it, because you're a well-established writer and you're a bit of a self-confessed productivity geek. And here you are writing a book about using time well. And I think it would be easy to assume that you just cruised it. Is that true? Or are you sometimes secretly a bit of a failing writer like us?
I'll be interested to hear your definitions of failing here. But failing to use time in a calm and efficient and consistent way, 100%. I don't think there's anything very secret about it, really. I feel like there is occasionally this idea that if you write books of, on some level, advice, self-help if you want, whatever, that this is going to mean that you've worked all this out and you're just sort of graciously sharing your wisdom with inferior people. But of course, really, the reason the topic is interesting is because I'm really bad at it, and I was sort of writing a book of advice that I needed to hear, and and to follow. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to close the door so that I'm not distracted by extraneous sounds, which is yet another thing that gets in the way of efficient writing. Hold on.
Distractions.
Okay, picking up where I left off.
Can't believe we're 2 minutes in and you've already been distracted. That does in many ways answer the question, doesn't it?
I mean, if you want to know, the life cycle of my last book, 4,000 Weeks, was that I sort of sold a book proposal, then I became a father, like sort of, less than a year after that. So then, no writing got done for an extensive period, and I had to negotiate extensions and things. And then I was sort of halfway, 2/3 of the way through it when the pandemic happened. And there was one narrative around the pandemic, which is a very obnoxious thing about how like now everyone could be really productive because they were at home and had nothing else to do, which is certainly ridiculous, especially if you've got a kid in the mix. That wasn't why I got it done in the pandemic, but I did sort of get it done partly out of fear, because I suddenly thought, you know what, I think if the world publishing industry is about to collapse, I'd quite like to get my delivery payment before that happens. As it turned out, the world publishing industry did really well coming out through and out of the pandemic, so it wasn't a real thing. But so no, it was in sort of fits and starts and long periods of not quite figuring it out and all the rest of it. The only reason I don't think that is some kind of shameful admission in the context of the book is that I think I'm fairly open about that, and I also think that where I ended up at the end of that writing that book was somewhere different in my approach to and experience of time and procrastination and all those things.
So did the book turn out differently than if it was sort of part of a bit of a journey that you were doing? Did it turn out differently to the proposal that you'd put into the publishers?
It's weird. The weird part is how, it was very different in some ways, but the sort of basic idea, which for people not familiar with it, is to do with sort of confronting, acknowledging, even embracing the fact that we have so little time, and getting to the point where you kind of really truly admit defeat in your attempt to get everything done and use time maximally efficiently and optimize yourself, and how there's a lot of sort of calm and sanity, but also empowerment and productivity that comes out of making that sort of surrender. That sort of idea was there in the proposal, but I'd sort of reached that conclusion intellectually, but then sort of everything that happened in life after that made me think, like, how could I ever have realized this prior to now, right? So I've mentioned it already, but like if you become a parent, this will sort of eliminate vast swathes of your discretionary time in a single stroke. So the idea that you were limited is suddenly like 10 times as true as it was. There are all sorts of things to do with the pandemic, I think, that caused us to reevaluate how we're using our time in ways that, turns out, my insight in the book proposal was quite on point for, but like I couldn't have known that in advance. So it's weird. It's almost like you have an idea, or I have an idea that's very intellectual, and then you sort of, like, life just sort of obliges you to live into it and sort of change your character a little bit in order to sort of actually write the book.
Which is the acid test, isn't it? Whether your intellectual idea is just hot air and philosophical nonsense, or actual applicable, usable content, really.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful moment lots of people have talked about. You might have experienced it too, right? When an idea that you're sort of pursuing, suddenly like everything that happens to you and that you read or see in the world seems to be relevant to it in some way, and it doesn't necessarily last the whole lifespan of putting a book together, but it's kind of amazing when it's
just have images of you just walking around your day life going, oh my god, I was right, look at that. And people going, what is he on about?
Yes, humans are mortal. Yeah, right.
I knew it.
I think one of my biggest takeouts was the fact that it's so easy in the moment to get duped by all the things that are vying for your attention. Business tasks and chores and consumerism and social media, and you end up believing that you're too busy to do the things that actually matter, or the things that probably matter more.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think one of the aspects to that is, like, we're either always trying to find ways to get to do all of the things, or failing that, you want to try and convince yourself that all the things you're not doing aren't that important, and that maybe you never needed to do them anyway. And the truth of it is, there's just more totally good and useful and meaningful and enjoyable things to be done than you'll ever get to do, right? So it's like self-help productivity books are full of these kind of prioritization systems and goal-setting schemes, which all sort of seek to imply that if something really matters to you, there will be time to do it. And if there isn't time to do it, probably doesn't really matter. And it's like, it's just not true. There's no reason to believe that if something really matters, there'll be time to do it.
Do you think that's a coping mechanism, though, isn't it?
The goal setting and prioritization stuff.
Yeah, because it says, don't worry, if you follow these steps, everything's fine.
Yeah, no.
It's hiding away from the inevitable.
Totally, yeah. I think it's sort of, not all productivity books at all, but like the ones that I'm sort of thinking of here, you could sort of, they're kind of enabling an illusion that is not helpful.
Well, that's something that you repeatedly come at head on, though, isn't it? Saying, no, it's a bit rubbish in places, but if you accept that, then you can be happier about the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And the thing I'm always at pains to stress there is that it's a defeat or an acceptance or a surrender in the service of something quite empowering, right? It's actually letting go of trying to do everything that enables you to really focus on doing the handful of things that you want to do.
There's a lot of acceptance going on.
It's interesting that because I write, these books get published in the US and the UK, and I spent a long time living in the US, and there's a real cultural difference where, as you might expect, where like the American risk, I suppose, is to really think that you can like win at anything you set your mind to. And so there's a sort of, sometimes people find these ideas a bit difficult because I'm saying you can't and you've got to choose. But there's a sort of opposite British risk, which is to say like, to take sort of sardonic pleasure in the idea that it's all totally rubbish and you can't do anything and you might as well give up. And I'm always trying to say like, no, not that either, right? It's not surrender your attempts to do everything because
I may as well not bother then.
Right, because life is terrible.
Yeah.
It is actually so you can be a little bit more, shall we say, in a stereotypical sense, American in doing a handful of really impactful, meaningful, maybe lucrative, maybe satisfying, things. So I feel like I've got these two poles of like, you can't do everything, but you also don't need to like give up and like laugh sardonically at the fact that nothing can be done.
It's quite a good checks and balances system, isn't it, for your output though? That.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just someone who has always been sort of inclined towards skepticism and being more realistic than that kind of, hyperventilating classic American self-help.
Yeah.
But who is also quite ambitious for my career and does want to do things and doesn't want to sort of just like give up on it because you can't do everything. Yeah. So I'm just trying to find a container for what I want to do in life, a philosophical justification for what I want to do. Yeah.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Failing Writers podcast, please remember to recommend it to other people who you think might like it.
We touched on procrastination before, Oliver. Some great stuff in your book about the psychology of procrastination. Talk to us about what you think is going on when we struggle to commit to a task. Because it sort of makes no sense, doesn't it? That you end up not doing the very thing that you really want to do.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, there's lots of different ways to go in on this, but I think the sort of unifying thing throughout the book and other things I've written really is that it's painful in some sense of the term to confront your limitations, both the limitations of time in terms of quantity, you can't do everything, but also limitations of talent and limitations of resources that you have and all the rest of it. So
it's a way of avoiding having to face those things.
Right. We're always looking for ways to not have to feel the sort of constraint and claustrophobia of really being in the reality that we are in. And procrastination,
our impending death. Yeah.
Yes, right. And it's all because of our impending death that any of this that exists in the first place, right? If we lived forever, I think there'd be huge problems with that. But you wouldn't have to worry about not having enough time. So yeah, I mean, I think the where procrastination often figures in there is it's actually much more comfortable to carry on sort of wallowing in fantasies, whether consciously or subconsciously, about things being perfect, doing everything, doing it to an amazing standard, having everybody love it, than it is to bring something into the world, because then it's by definition not going to be perfect. It's going to go wrong, at least by that sort of incredibly exacting standard. And so, yeah, it's quite tempting to avoid doing things, because committing to things means committing to this world of trade-offs and opportunity cost and things not measuring up to. I mean, it all comes down to the fact that we are these kind of bizarre animals who have minds that can imagine things with no limitations of quality or of how much time we can put into them or how well people will respond. inside material bodies in a material world that is just as limited as, if we were cats and dogs or sheep or something, right? I mean, it's a mismatch that we're always sort of negotiating. And I think what a sort of avoidant way of doing that is to avoid getting started on things at all, so that you can hang on to that wonderful image of how great they would be if they worked out perfectly.
This is a particularly good time in history as well to be distracted, because there are just so many amazing distractions. Yeah, we seem to be in a period of sort of pandemic levels of distractibility. There was a bit in your book about even reading books being so much more difficult for people now than they used to be.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about distraction to me is we're in this new era of an attention economy that is really a distraction economy, right? There's huge amounts of money to be made by people who can distract us successfully. On the other hand, I also sort of want to say it does come from inside. That one of the things that sort of annoyed me when I was looking into this first was how people talk about digital distraction as if you're just sort of sitting there calmly and happily writing your book, and then totally against your will, Twitter or whatever, Instagram comes.
Feels like that though, Oliver.
Well, but you examine it for 1 second, you see it closely in the moment, and what you see is that you were feeling uncomfortable or annoyed or bored or stressed by the thing that you were doing, and it feels way more fun to go and just or scroll down, watch some people fighting with each other about stuff. And so, it's not quite right to say that.
Just described X perfectly.
Yeah, right. And it's numbing, or I try not to do it for this reason, but you can tell if you're sort of really stressed about something or angry about something or whatever it is, watching all that stuff has an immediate sort of placating effect. Then if you stay there more than 10 minutes, you get furious about the nonsense that people are coming up with now, and it all starts again. But, I think it's really the phrase I use in the book is if there is a war for our attention, which is a thing people say a lot, we do sort of collaborate with the enemy. We don't. We're not sitting there trying not to go onto social media. We're saying "Oh, that would be lovely."
Talking about history, and I don't know if you've studied this. I'm sure you'll have thought about it, Oliver. The things that you talk about, and the way people can deal with the feelings of not having enough time to do everything, etc., etc. Is this a solely modern solution to a completely modern problem, or is this something that has hampered humans ever since we stopped being hunter-gatherers? Do you think?
I mean, I find this really, really interesting because people tend to talk about these topics historically on a frame of 50 years or something, right?
Yeah.
They talk about all the specific ways in which, totally, 2024 is very different from, 1970 or something. But there is this much bigger sweep. And I'm quite careful in the book and elsewhere to say, I think figuring out what causes what and exactly when things happen in this kind of way is a mug's game. So I'm not really trying to do that.
Yeah.
But there is this shift from sort of pre-industrial times and pre-clock times through to where we are now, which has the most fundamental change is not to do with how fast things go or how many things can be done at once or anything like that. It's just this very basic notion, almost so basic that it's hard to hold your mind on it, of time as being some kind of thing that is separate from you, that you have a relationship with, that you need to use well, or that you're guilty of using badly, or that you don't have enough of, or that you need to buy more of. That whole framework is something that serves a lot of purposes to have time objectified in this way, but it causes all the problems. And I make this sort of argument in 4,000 Weeks that you can have a good guess that if you'd been a medieval peasant working on small-scale agriculture in medieval times, while having a completely terrible life on almost every measure, you probably wouldn't have had these kind of time problems, this feeling of being too busy or of needing things moving too fast or too slow or needing to use time in a different way, because that whole separation between me and time would not have existed. There's this anthropologists use this phrase task orientation to describe this way of life, and sometimes they identify it in certain kinds of non-industrialized indigenous cultures today as well, where the rhythms of your day just unfold from the natural world. You get up when the sun gets up and you milk the cows when the cows need milking, whatever. And you're not doing this thing that we're all doing so instinctively that we don't notice we're doing it, which is lining up everything we're doing in the day along a little yardstick, or conveyor belt is another image that somebody uses that I quote, right? So sort of this idea of okay, there's a space that I've got this afternoon, and then there's like 10 things I've got to try to fit into that space.
It's time as commodity, isn't it?
Right. No, absolutely. And it's selling it starts partly with the shift from piecework to shift work in the Industrial Revolution, and time becomes something you can sell as a worker. And then if you're the factory or the mill owner, you want to try to extract maximum value from each hour of the time. And you see these amazing things happening around that time in the historical records, where certain kinds of sort of emerging capitalists, basically factory owners and mill owners, but sort of furious at the idea that their workers are chatting or reading news or like just sort of idling on the clock, which, in a sense, I guess, fair enough, but just something that hadn't existed before, because what you were doing is you were sort of, delivering a certain number of slaughtered pigs or whatever it was. It wasn't anybody's business exactly how the time went by. So this real focus on like how the resource is being consumed, who the resource belongs to. If you've sold your hours in a shift, then does the guy who's buying them get to tell you exactly, all this stuff all just comes from that kind of objectified relationship. And I think we do still experience the other thing, right, today in isolated moments. There is that experience of time standing still or being in flow or whatever. And that what's not happening then is this thing, I think, where you're lining up everything you do to see if you can fit it in or if you're making the best use of it.
So it's almost basically why we invented the holiday. Although some people probably still run the holidays on a sort of a timetabled routine, because they can't get the brain away from it.
But right, no, the very notion that leisure is something that you get to do after you've done enough work and it's time for a break, is really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's like, obviously, a lot of that stuff, like the weekend and certain kind of protected holidays, were won by workers' rights movements that were looking out for the workers, but they sort of buy in unavoidably to the underlying idea that work is the thing you do, and then leisure is the thing you sometimes.
Yes, you have to accept that in order to agree with the whole thing.
Right. Whereas Aristotle would have said no, like leisure is the point of life, and then maybe some poor benighted people have to work sometimes in order to maintain their leisure. But let's be clear about this: like, the point is leisure, not work.
Well, butter me like a freshly baked muffin and call me George. That was a lovely first half of the Failing Writers podcast, wasn't it? Let's have a listen to some more.
Do you have any practical tips for a couple of failing writers like Tom and I in terms of how to maybe get us writing more productively? I know this is kind of, in some way,
an impossible task.
Yeah, an impossible task. And sort of going against the grain. But I know that you do. I know that you do have some tips to make the most of those important things that you want to get.
Yeah,
done.
I feel like I want to ask first, though, like, not because I'm going to then offer an amazingly pinpointed solution. How do you think of the problem you're trying to address? Because I feel like all of us writing have like 25 different psychodramas going on about it. And I think one of the things that I try to push back against in my stuff is like not to imagine that there's one solution to it all.
What we find difficult. I mean, I can't speak for Tom, obviously, but for me, it's really exactly what you talk about in the book. There's always something more pressing. It's not necessarily more important, but the other thing kind of needs doing now, and writing can wait because I need like a little chunk of time to kind of get my head into the game. That's kind of my excuse, if you like. But I love writing. Like when I do actually sit down and start writing, and I kind of get like you were saying just then, when you get into the flow, I love it.
Yeah.
But it's getting to that point where I sort of initiate it, I suppose. Why is that so difficult? And is there anything you can do are there any little tricks that you've got that help you?
I think all the things that work for me in this area share this kind of idea of cultivating a willingness to experience a bit of the discomfort that comes from it, right? Because if you're going to put an hour in to a writing project when there's a lot of other things that feel like they need doing, it's an incredibly big demand of yourself that you not only do that, but also don't feel bothered and anxious and upset about all those things that you're not doing. To sort of meet yourself halfway is to say like, well, I will do the writing, but I will allow the fact that it's not going to feel right at first because there are all these things that have these different agendas pressing down on me. So I'm really a big fan of the phrasing of this that creativity coach, a friend of mine called Jessica Abel, uses, which is paying yourself first. This idea in finances, obviously personal finance, right, that you should paying yourself first means when you get your paycheck, you put a bit aside into savings and then live off the rest. Instead of spending whatever you need over the month and hoping there'll be some at the end to put into savings. If you hope for the time or the money to be around later on, it'll never happen. But if you claim it up front, then you've already claimed it. And if you pay yourself first with time, that really is the idea of, not trying to get to the place where the decks are all cleared and then you feel liberated to put in an hour on the writing, but putting an hour on the writing anyway. And it's interesting what happens, right? Because those feelings do sort of fade, or they get metabolized somehow. I don't quite know what how to describe it.
If you practice that over and over.
Right. And it's like, the other thing that I'm always banging on about in my books is like, it's literally always the case that there is a million other things that are worthy of your attention, right? So the quest to clear the decks first is an endless one, and you'll spend your whole life clearing the decks. So at some point you do just have to lean in a little bit to that discomfort. And in another way, one of the things I did, I've just written a new book that's coming out soon. And one of the things that, because 4,000 Weeks did better than I was expecting. And then I had this wonderful problem to have, but I had this like totally predictable kind of freeze response where I'm like, oh no, now I've got to make sure it's as good as that. Or I've got to make sure that, or there'll be more people watching. If I humiliate myself, it'll be much more public humiliation than the last time. So I actually went for some, I don't know what your opinion about these are, but like I read a very interesting couple of books on free writing, on just the kind of writing where you just set a timer and just put words on the page without stopping, which I have traditionally absolutely hated. Like I just cannot abide this and sort of feel very snooty about people who write this way, because I'm just like, no, I can write well. So I want things to come out good, and I will wait until the sentence works before I move on to the next sentence. But of course, all that is on some level is a refusal to feel the anxiety or distress of, the fact that it's an attempt to sort of have more control over life than you can really have. So I really broke through that blockage a bit by doing these kind of timed 30-minute things where I would write, and the rule was just don't stop. Doesn't mean you have to go really fast, but just don't stop and stay sort of mentally present with it. So don't sort of zone out and just start typing.
And no editing, or just...
No editing. And it wasn't like, lots of it was absolutely nothing and got nowhere close to the final manuscript. But the skill that I was in training was not writing. The skill was being okay with how abhorrent I felt the mess that I was making on the page was, because of course no one else has to see it, right? So it's completely absurd fear to have, but it was really useful for me to do that and notice that it didn't sort of like, wasn't the end of the world when I'd written half an hour's worth of stuff that I didn't like, and that then ideas come out of it and good phrases come out of it and all sorts of things, interesting things start happening. But like traditionally I had shunned those things so much, so it was a really interesting like thing to go through to be to make myself willing to do that. Just one more thing that I think is really helpful is completing things that you start, and if that's difficult or if they're too big, then just gaming the system by defining the thing you're trying to finish as really small. And in the new book I talk about this as like working in sort of discrete deliverables, and I talk about how like this is a terrible phrase, right, that comes from awful management world where people are always talking about like cloudifying best practices and key learnings.
Run it up the flagpole and we'll see if we salute.
Right, exactly. But that's what I really like about it. It's like it's so non-dramatic. You can't get pretentious about a deliverable. It's just so sort of mundane. Yeah. It's like, okay, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to create like a 2-page plan for the structure of chapter 2. And I'm certainly not going to make the task write book, because that is going to take too long, but I'm going to make this kind of discrete thing that could be done in a few hours. And I'm not going to take on other work or do other work or worry about other work while this one thing is what's on my plate. And then I'm going to complete it and sort of psychologically or even physically like move it off my desk. And that is done. And there's something extraordinary I've always found about this, right? You'd think that making yourself finish things would be exhausting, but it actually gives you an energy boost, because there's some, I don't know why, but I've got some theories, but like it actually feels great to people of personalities similar to mine anyway, to define some little packet of work that you're going to do do it and be done with it. It really changes the whole feeling of agency that you have and purchase that you have over reality, instead of in this kind of situation of having some incredibly far off goal of like writing a whole book. And then obviously on some level that might just be the advice to break big projects down into small chunks, which has been given to school children since Victorian times. But I think there's something really specific about making things completable and knowing when they're completed, and knowing also when setting a reachable standard for what would count as a day of doing enough with the day, and just really sort of lowballing that and getting consistent about doing these small amounts.
I think that's a huge thing about defining what it means for it to be completed, putting that kind of line in the sand of where the actual, I mean, it seems ridiculous saying that out loud now, because obviously you wouldn't start a race without knowing where the finish line was.
Right.
But yeah, just the idea of defining exactly what completed means for that.
Yeah.
And then you get to define, and I'm talking about failing and failing writers, that means you get to define where that line between failing to complete the task and succeeding is. And it can be in a completely different place than someone else would perceive that to be.
Yeah, that's really well put. Yeah, no, right. And it can be, it could be a number of words regardless of their merit.
Yeah.
It could be a one-page document that has the basic outline of X. It could be, depending on the kind of writing, it could be take notes on these 3 sources or something. I think otherwise the temptation is to always define what you need to do as somewhere you haven't got yet.
Yeah.
And that's just a recipe for permanent low self-esteem.
Yeah.
There's a bit in your book, and I can't remember actually whether it was in your book or whether it was on your blog, about doing short bursts of writing and then walking away at the end of it.
Yeah.
And forcing yourself to stop, even if you're going great, because it trains you, it strengthens your patience, basically.
Yeah.
And it seems like a similar kind of idea that you're almost kind of rewiring your brain as you're doing it.
Yeah. No, this is an idea that comes from a psychologist and writer who's with a big focus on writers called Robert Boyce. He did this sort of big study of academic writers and discovered that the most productive ones and the most people who enjoyed the work that they were doing the most were those who never made writing more than a modest part of their daily and weekly schedules. They didn't allow it to become this sort of huge, intimidating monster. And depending on how blocked someone was, he would recommend that you worked for, even just the smallest amount of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And that's quite common advice. But the bit that really struck me and that I wrote about was that he then says, well, when that time's up, stop. Don't say, well, I'm on a roll now, so let's keep going. Because I think, as he rightly points out, for lots of us anyway, that kind of let's keep going feeling is really impatience and hurry, and the feeling that maybe now something magic has happened and you're going to
I've caught the muse.
Right, you're going to bomb it through to the end and you're going to finish today. And it's like, those are all the seductive things to resist. And the thing to do is to be like, okay, 15 minutes, I'm now going to leave. I've also written about this. There's an essay, it's on her website. There's an essay by a psychologist called Virginia Valian, who wrote a chapter in a book. And the chapter is called Learning to Work. And it's about when she, back in the 70s, had this big crisis writing her own thesis, and describes this mental process of working back from, how much someone else might think she should do each day to sort of, like, maybe you should do 5 hours writing a day, and going back down and down and down to like, what was she actually willing in her state of paralyzed anxiety? Like, what was she actually willing to do? And coming down to 15 minutes a day, and talking about how people laughed when she told them about this because it's so ridiculous. But actually, there's something kind of really sort of, I don't know, courageous about it, to actually ask honestly what you're willing to do instead of spin all these fantasies about how tomorrow you're going to get up and do 10 times that amount, and then to do it and then to stop. Like that, it takes a certain kind of guts, I think. And the real guts about it is that it's doable, right? It's like, sorry, I'm going on, but I've also got a friend who's a meditation teacher and does these very long sits of like 2 or 3 hours. So even some days he wakes up and can't face doing his like 2-hour morning meditation. And he has the same process. Like, okay, am I willing to do an hour? Am I willing to do half an hour? And maybe it's 6 minutes, but then you've found the place where you, I'm looking for a metaphor from gearboxes that I don't know the words for. Like, there's a point where you like get traction, maybe on
biting point.
Maybe, yeah.
You're letting the clutch out,
it's to do with clutches. Yeah.
We can ditch that one because that's not going to work that side of the pond, is it?
No, yes, nothing from stick shifts can be permissible in writing metaphors.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. Really interesting. Well, I think you've solved all our problems, to be honest. I think that's a done deal.
Yeah, be flying through those books. I was just, throughout that, I was thinking, what am I willing to do today? 30 seconds? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
can live
Well,
with
I
that.
mean, and it's not a joke, right? It's like if you actually do it and the next day it's a little bit more, maybe, it's like
Yeah.
you'll be doing an hour in no time.
And I think psychologically there's a huge thing, isn't it, about saying you're going to do half an hour, doing half an hour and stopping. Then your stupid monkey brain goes, oh, that wasn't that bad. Oh, we are actually stopping. That's fine. So when you're saying it again the next time, your subconscious is going, yeah, well, it's not going to be too painful.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's always the problem, isn't it? Writing is hard and it's effort. It's like going out for a run or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a point of your brain going, it sounds like it might be a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe we could just do the old have a look on TikTok instead for a bit.
Right. And you're sort of, but you're also, yes, you're right. But the first part of that really resonated with me because you're saying like you sort of bits of your brain are building trust in other bits of your brain. And they're trusting that like if they let you work for half an hour tomorrow,
you can have the rest of the day off. Kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and your brain's like, oh, yeah, that sounds fine.
Yeah, no, exactly. But also they're trusting that you're not going to be tricked by the sort of inner taskmaster who screams at you and be like, haha, no, not half an hour. In fact, you're going to work for 6 hours. It's like, no, you're going to work for half an hour and step away, even though it feels weird and wrong, because what we're doing here is building this kind of trust that we can do this small amount and keep coming back to it. And of course, what you then find when it's going well is that like you're quite excited to come back to writing because it's not something that you allow yourself to do for 12 hours a day. It's almost kind of it's a treat on some level.
Yeah.
Coming back to our 4,000 weeks, which is a great title.
Thank you.
By the way. And trying to come to terms, because a lot of this comes down to our finitude, the idea that we are limited in time. But I loved the idea of the last time, which I thought was a brilliant way of visualizing your mortality, if you like, and kind of accepting it. And you talk about the fact that at some point there'll be a last time you do everything, and you won't know in the moment that you're doing it, that it will be the last time that you hug your wife or you sit and chat with your best mate in the pub or whatever it is, go for a bike ride. So it's good to treat all those things as though they might be the last time. I thought that was brilliant. That's really nice. It does make you see things differently. I'm not sure you could do it all the time, but I think it's really good. It brings to life that finitude that, it makes that fact absolute in your head.
Yeah, no, I feel like, first of all, I need to give proper credit for this way of phrasing it to Sam Harrison, his Waking Up Act, which is where it sort of originates from. But also, in another sense, it originates, thousands of years ago in Zen and all sorts of things, because it's not necessarily, I think the deeper truth there is that every moment is the last moment anyway, right? Like this, every moment is the last moment you'll be experiencing that moment. So sometimes they will be, sometimes it will also be like the last time you see somebody or the last time you do some activity. Other times it's just like, no, the moment is here and then it is gone. And there's some lovely writing in the history of Zen and Japanese culture about the Japanese tea ceremony. It's very sort of exquisitely, carefully performed tea drinking ritual that sort of makes the argument that what it's trying to evoke in that sort of very precise care that is brought to it is the fact that like this moment will never happen again. Even if you have 100 more tea ceremonies in your life, and even if you always have them with the same people, like there can never be more, this moment can never recur. And that's, it's just always true. And this is something you can sort of relax into a little bit. I think it gives life a bit of an extra layer of liveliness and depth without it's not a case for sort of stressfully through every minute.
Oh my God, this is the last time.
Worried about whether you're getting enough value out of things.
Well, Oliver, all that's left to say is we've run out of time, which feels like a fitting end to this chat. You cannot beat time. Don't bother fighting it.
No, get in, go with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
No, it's been great. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to very briefly and self-promotingly mention my forthcoming book, which is called
please do.
Which is called Meditations for Mortals, and the subtitle, getting a bit self-helpy here, is 4 weeks to embrace your limitations and make time for what counts. It's sort of structured around the idea that you might, although I can't force anybody, read each of the 28 short chapters per day for 4 weeks and sort of let this finitude embracing viewpoint kind of sink under your skin.
So it is almost a sort of a way of living the 4,000 weeks to a certain extent. It's almost a kind of a sequel.
Yeah, I've been really careful to make sure that like nobody needs to have read anything else I've ever written to benefit from it, I hope. But like it's it's sort of probably got a wider frame beyond time to sort of all the different ways in which we're limited. But yeah, I think it's just helpful to have more and fresh ways of getting into this thing, because what I don't think is that there is like one 5-point system out there that could ever put it in place once and for all, and then you forget about it. So it's really sort of returning to some of the same things at deeper levels and different angles.
Very good.
So when's that book out?
That is out in the UK in September, in the 12th of September.
Brilliant.
All right, fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yep.
Fantastic.
People should definitely make time to order that book.
Oh,
I think it's fair to say.
Can I hire you as a advertising consultant?
I haven't got time, to be honest with you. Well, I'm glad we finally got round to interviewing him, John. That was worthwhile, wasn't it?
It was. It's quite mollifying, isn't it, to hear that someone like Oliver is also prone to delay tactics.
Yeah, I think what's really nice and refreshing, though, about his approach is his very real-world approach to it. And it's not all rosy. It's not this, like he said in his interview, it's not this kind of American, you can do anything you want to do. It resonates with me, that kind of, well, look, life is a bit shit in places, but, you know, it's rather than just the old being like, yeah, you can do it, because the trouble ones with the you can do it and you can do anything, as soon as you have a little wobble or a fall, you think, oh, no, I can't then, can I?
Yeah.
I'm not doing it right.
like those people.
Yeah, I'm not doing it right.
Yeah.
I'm a failure.
I mean, it's basically what this podcast is all about.
Yeah. No, it really is, isn't it?
It's a little reality check.
Yeah.
Well, do you know what, Tom? All this talk of procrastination
Yeah.
is actually moot.
Why's that?
Because I remembered something I spotted the other day, which will actually just remove all of these problems forever.
Right.
Do you remember? I don't know if you remember, ages ago, we were discussing, I can't really remember the specifics of it, but there was someone online saying that they can come up with brilliant ideas for books for you.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah,
For a small fee, I will come up with brilliant ideas for a book. And we were joking that is not the bit that we struggle with.
Absolutely.
Like the ideas are the fun bit.
Yeah.
That's the good bit. It's the actual writing that you want someone else to do. Well, I came across a website where you can hire ghostwriters to write the book that you can't be asked writing.
Right. So you think join the two together?
Yeah. So not a problem. It's called theurbanwriters.com.
Right.
Costs you about $4,000. But it feels like that is a very worthy investment to be able to farm out your brilliant idea and free up time for, other worthier ventures.
Yeah. I guess that's
amazing is that?
another foreshadowing of AI, isn't it? And it's
well, yeah, because that's the other slightly concerning thing, is that it's part of Dibbly, which I think is a kind of AI writing tool, I believe. So I'm not sure how much of the writing would actually be done by humans.
So even the people that are promising to do the writing for you can't be asked to do the writing for you.
Exactly.
Wow.
But that's not surprising, is it? Because I mean, we know how hard it is to write a book that you're actually excited about writing. Imagine being handed an idea that you're not even interested in and trying to write that.
Yeah. Hey, John, I read another book about procrastination.
Oh, yeah?
Called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle by Professor Tim Pitchell. And do you remember I said last week, it was very sort of scientific, academic-y in kind of its structure and stuff. Some of the stuff in this one, if you're of, I don't know, if you're of a computer programming background or mindset, or that kind of, you've got that kind of brain, that kind of sort of maths-based brain.
So what do you mean? As in he sort of goes into the neurology of
no, not so much that, but just the way he's the coping strategies that it puts together, very explicit coping strategies.
Okay.
And I've got to share one of them with you that kind of runs through it. It's something called an implementation intention, and it's kind of sort of self-manipulation, if you like, which never ceases to amaze me that we can, and there's all these self-help books that do the same sort of thing, where you're tricking your own brain into not doing what your brain is doing, even though it's your brain, but we're kind of trying to reprogram stuff.
Yeah.
So it's based on the implementation intention is an if-then statement. So it's like a bit of computer programming.
Yeah. Okay.
So if I say to myself things like, I'll feel more like doing this later, or I don't feel like doing this now, then I will just get started on some aspect of the task. So that's an example of it.
Okay.
But what gets me, the two things don't have to actually directly link. It's just saying if this trigger happens, that means you have to do this.
Right. Okay.
And just as a reprogramming situation for your brain.
But you have to stick. You have to have a kind of code with yourself that you have to stick with it.
Yeah. But it's kind of, I guess it's acknowledging these triggers of the things that people who procrastinate do and using them as I'm doing that. Right. I just need to do 5 minutes on the task then, which is quite an interesting. I just think that kind of reprogramming habit, changing your habits thing is a.
Yeah, because Oliver talks about that as well. It's like that's a really important part of this whole process in a way, is to use the plasticity of your brain in order to try and retrain it to think in a slightly different way. Yeah. No, I can see how that might work.
The whole book was quite a good balance to sort of the Oliver's touchy-feely stuff to kind of like sort of more, not dry, but kind of academic.
Give specific instructions almost.
Yeah, it's quite a good balance.
Yeah.
So that's the Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. Quite a short book, but he's kind of sets out.
He couldn't be asked writing it any longer.
Well, he does a really good opening chapter about why it's a short book. And that bit, I have to say, to me, read like my introduction to a presentation I'd not quite put the full work into, but very good justification. But no, it does. It kind of says, look, he's taken out all the studies and stuff. It's kind of like a bit of a trust me, I've looked at all this stuff and distilled it down.
Yeah.
And to be fair, he's got a point. If you are in a procrastination hole and that is the kind of person you are, the last thing you want to be doing is sitting down to a big, thick book.
Oh, yeah.
It's never going to make it off the shelf, is it?
No, that's true. That is true. He knows his audience, doesn't he?
So there you go. That's everyone's procrastination problems sorted.
There you go, procrastinators. Couple of books for you there. Get them on your reading list. Do you want to say anything, Thomas? Like bye?
No,
or
we'll do a goodbye. That seems appropriate now, doesn't it? It's the right place for it, isn't it? I wanted to say it earlier, but I waited. I think now is the time to say it. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Hello.
Hello?
Where's everybody gone?